Our City News special election coverage continues now as we pose questions to the two leading candidates in the Toronto mayoral race. Earlier, you heard them discuss crime. Now, let's talk taxes. My question to them was, there are $29 billion worth of unfunded capital projects. Toronto has the lowest property tax bill in the GTHA. The past two city managers have said the way Toronto runs its finances is not sustainable, and we cannot continue to balance the books by raiding the reserves. Nobody wants their taxes to go up, but I asked them both, is it not irresponsible to not raise taxes above inflation to address these issues?
So we have this challenge that we face in our city right now, is that we've had some level-headed, sophisticated, smart, tough-minded city managers who've come forward and said, look, what you are doing, the way you're managing your finances is unsustainable. And there has been no response on the political level. Mr. Tory continues to propose the same approach, a status quo approach, even to the point where the previous city manager, after ringing that bell for many months, he said, forget it, I'm out of here. And he left after only 2 years. And that was his number one message, is that this approach cannot be sustained.
Well, first of all, I can begin by commenting on what the credit rating agencies have said, who are the independent people who come from elsewhere, who lend us money and monitor. They don't lend us the money, but they monitor the credit worthiness of the city, and they've said the city is well managed financially during my time in office. That's their comment. The second thing I would point out is that even with a low tax increase held to the rate of inflation or below, which I've committed to doing for the next 4 years, we have managed each of those years to have a surplus and to make record investments, as we discussed earlier, in the TTC, record investments in student nutrition, record investments in Toronto community housing. And I think if you look, in fact, at some of the progress we've made, we got $9 billion, thanks to good partnerships that I nurtured with the other governments. We got $9 billion to pay for the first phase of the transit plan that I'm determined not to see delayed as others would do. So we got $9 billion for that. We're going to have substantial sums of money flowing to the City of Toronto that address precisely that list of projects as a result of the National Housing Strategy, which I was a leading advocate on. We got $140 million, or I think it may even been $170 million when it's fully phased in, a year from the provincial government in new money. That was instead of the road tolls that I put forward to precisely answer the question, how are we going to pay for a number of the projects going forward? So we have $170 million in new money coming to help us pay for that is coming from the provincial gas tax, which is as it should be.
I think there's really three key opportunities here. The first one is, we know that you cannot support a city of this magnitude and this scale off the property tax base alone, and we need a realignment with other levels of government in terms of the money that's being invested into this city. That's the first thing that has to happen, and we need a campaign to be very clear about the value in the tax dollars being paid out of this city that are not being returned back from other levels of government. It's in the tens of billions of dollars that we're giving to the province that we're not seeing back in reinvestment, as an example. So that's the first step. The second step is that we need to be spending our money on the right thing. We have billion-dollar infrastructure projects that have been demonstrated to add little benefit or little value through a cost-benefit analysis. The Gardiner Expressway. The business case said, tear down that crumbling infrastructure and put a grand boulevard in its place. And we can do that for $500 million less. Torontonians don't want their money thrown out the door. We have to be responsible and transparent and use good data and analytics in our decision making. And then the third is I've approached a progressive approach to property taxes. With respect to my rent-to-own program, having the people who've done the very, very best in our real estate market contributing a little bit more back so that the next generation can access home ownership. It's a progressive tax.
I will tell you now, I will not take especially seniors and young people who are struggling right now to pay all their bills, including one of the biggest bills they pay every year, which is their property tax bill, and say to them, I'm going to send you along a bill for 5 or 6%. That is simply going to make it more difficult for people to afford to live here and to afford to have a home in Toronto. And I won't do that. I think we can get the support from the other governments. We can have a plan that now includes much more capital investment being made in a number of areas, including the TTC and Toronto community housing. And I will continue with those efforts going forward and continue to get the rave reviews from the credit rating agencies who look objectively at our financial management and give us credit for it each time.
All right, now we are going to talk taxes. You just heard their answer to the question about taxes and how can they justify keeping them to the rate of inflation. What are your thoughts? Sheila, I'm going to start with you. What are your thoughts on what they had to say?
Well, you said it, Cynthia. We have the lowest property tax rate in the GTHA, and if we don't increase revenues to the city, we're not going to be able to pay for the public services that so desperately need investment, like the TTC. If we freeze funding to the TTC, we are going to see service cuts and fare hikes over the next 4 years.
Did you like anything that you heard either of them say?
Well, Jennifer Keesmaat did mention changing the Gardner plan and the savings that would come from that, the progressive tax, but we haven't seen a fully costed fiscal plan from either. I'm still waiting to hear about firm commitments on transit funding.
Housing is a crucial issue, and we're going to be hearing your question, but what were your thoughts on the budget and their fiscal answers to it?
I was impressed, especially by Jennifer Keesmaat's mention of a progressive tax, but I think it has to be bolder. And I think our politicians and our leaders need to be willing to make bold moves in order to stop the rampant inequality in Toronto from becoming worse. And without higher taxation on those who can afford it, those who can't afford it are going to just be in a worse and worse situation. And we see that. We see that with people becoming homeless every day.
Now, John Tory did say, you know, people can't afford it, and he doesn't want to do that to seniors and younger people. Your response, any of you, to that?
I'll go.
Okay.
Well, I think, you know, they should be more efficient at City Hall. I think a lot of things are really wasteful spending, and looking at other cities, you know, around the world and seeing how they do. I know people in my community cannot afford to pay any more, not even another cent more. So I think they have to do their best to try to just like watch their spending and, you know, try to, you know, think about the future and not just, you know, creating all these kind of projects that, you know, they have to do their research and hopefully, you know, they can limit their spending.
It's a tough balancing act, I think, for a politician who wants to be elected or re-elected to suddenly float, I'm going to raise your taxes. It could be called political suicide. Sheila?
Well, it's like you mentioned, those of us who can afford to pay should pay more so that everybody in the city benefits and has public services that we all depend on delivered and funded properly.
All right. Thank you very much for weighing in, and we will be back very soon with our next discussion. John Tory and Jennifer Keesmaat take on transit.